Welcome to Myanmar Musings, a podcast of the Myanmar Research Centre at the Australian National University, Canberra. I'm Luke Corbin. It's June 8, 2021, and today we are talking films and fundraising with two of the organisers of the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. First, we have Kenneth Wong, an author, translator, and Burmese language teacher at the University of California, Berkeley. Hello, Kenneth.
Well, hello, Luke. Thank you very much for having me on your program. I'm so glad to be here.
And we're also speaking with Jeanne Marie Hallacy, a filmmaker, co-founder of Kirana Productions, and the director of Insight Out, a digital storytelling project for refugee and migrant youth. Hello, Jeanne.
Hello, Luke. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you both here, and especially while this film festival is still going on. Now, the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival features over 30 films from or about Myanmar, plus daily live talks with prominent activists and observers. The proceeds from the festival are going to grassroots humanitarian organisations working in Myanmar. As I said, the festival is running right now online until June 13. So if you are listening to this podcast on a computer or smartphone, then you have the means to participate in the festival and watch a selection of great films and talks when this podcast is over, of course. Simply go to bsbff.eventive.org or just search for Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival in your internet browser. So, Kenneth, can I ask you off the bat, what inspired this festival and how's it related to what's happening inside Myanmar right now, which has fallen off a lot of mainstream news cycles?
A lot of us want to do something to help the people who are fighting for democracy, help them resist the authoritarian regime, and really bring the country back to the place where it can have control of its own political destiny. I was born and raised in Burma until I was the age of 19 when I immigrated to the US. So I have a vested interest in seeing my childhood friends have a better future, for example. But the nature of what we do tends to be dictated by our own background and our own strength and our ability. So in our case meaning the small group of organizers that have launched this initiative, we have backgrounds in art, literature. I, for example, have a good background in translating poetry, and I've been involved in narrating some Burmese movies that are about Burma. And my co-organizers, Jeanne and Alan, for example, come from the documentary film background. So it seems natural that we would ended up doing something related to film and art. So the other organizer happens to be the producer of the annual Buddhist Film Festival. So it's for a natural conclusion for us was to put on a virtual film festival.
And what are the festival's explicit goals? Do you have a fundraising target, or do you have some other way of measuring exposure or something like that?
We certainly have a amount that we want to reach, and we're looking at the numbers, and it's heading that way. And we have no doubt that we'll be able to reach the amount that we want to raise. And really, it's going to the people who are affected by the recent political crisis. So, for example, you may have reporters and media people who have to do their job in the front line in really dangerous situation, and people who have been harmed or hurt or killed in the protests, and they have families, surviving families. So those are two of the groups that we intend to support with the funds that we raise. The film festival is good in another way, that a lot of these films explore the topics and the themes that I believe serves as the root causes of the upheaval that is happening in Burma. So, for example, the rise of ethnocentric nationalism or the inequality or the fragility of the democratic process itself under the previous quasi-civilian administration. All of those things are explored in the film. So it's almost like if somebody wants to, they can actually watch these films to try to find clues to why the coup happened the way it did and why the people's resistance happens to be this robust and this strong.
And if people want to log on and to buy a ticket for the festival, how does that work? How much does it cost?
The recommended ticket price is $30. But nobody is turned away for a lack of fund, because we really want people to be able to watch as many films as possible and come away with a much better understanding of the country. There is, in my view, this enchanting country. This is the country where George Orwell was inspired to write his first anti-colonial novel, Burmese Days. This is the country where I remember fondly sitting in tea shops talking to my writer and poet friends for hours about literature, Western and Burmese literature. This is the country where spirit mediums in Bokpa and the startups in downtown Yangon coexist in a paradoxical mixture. All of these are the charm of the country that people might not see if they are focusing too much on the bloodshed and the political turmoil. So the film festival, I hope, introduced these aspects of the country to the people.
Well, given your background, Kenneth, in language teaching, translating, etc., I want to ask you about the languages in the films. Are all the films in the Burmese language? Do they all feature subtitles? And are there any accessibility related points of interest?
All of them have subtitles. Most of them, I would say, the primary language spoken by the subject or the characters in the films are Burmese language. One particular film, however, almost manages to tell a poignant and touching story, moves your heart without even using a whole lot of words. And that's the animation short, My Life I Don't Want. So that animation short tells you about what it is like to grow up as a young woman, trace the life of a young woman from birth to marriage and school days and beyond. And it manages to do that with really simple line drawings and wordless universal actions and symbolism. It tells you that there is this pioneering animation industry that was thriving, and there were a lot of good, talented artists who were in this industry. Unfortunately, of course, industries like that now have to be put on pause because of the military coup.
And maybe now turning to you, Jeannie, you've worked in the film industry in Myanmar. So can you tell us what is your part in this film festival and how did you come to be involved?
I'm one of the team that is comprised of all volunteers who are in the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's a very small group of us. There's only about 5 of us that have put this together quite quickly in response to the crisis in Myanmar. And each of us has a deep and long relationship with the country. And when we saw what was taking place there, we wanted to do something in response that would be positive. And the films were curated within that team by 3 people, myself being one of them. And my very good colleague, Ellen Bruno, she's a highly respected documentary filmmaker who also teaches at the Yangon Film School and has been to Burma many times. And Gaetano Maeda, he is the founder of the Buddhist Film Festival. And it's a wonderful festival that has traveled around the world. And he was the one that, kind of brought us all together to get this incredible project off the ground.
Awesome. Let's talk a bit more in detail about maybe those films. So what was the selection process, from an artistic, but also a logistical point of view? There have been so many films made inside Myanmar and shown at festivals there in the last 10 years, say. But many of them have never made it online, or those that have, it might not be possible to contact the people with the rights to those films at the current time. So please run us through the selection process.
Certainly. Well, first, I'd like to give a note of thanks to all the filmmakers who participated in this. We have quite a remarkable selection of films that I think has something for every viewer. And they are categorized and grouped together on the website for ease of selecting a topic that might be of interest, ranging from LGBT issues to ethnic groups to Buddhism to documentaries. And we also have some features, and I'm pleased that we have one animation. The process was one that was, of course, based upon the merit of the film from its storytelling content and the craftsmanship of the film, but also given what's happening in Myanmar, we wanted to ensure that some of the key issues that are still being, unfortunately coming back to the fore now that we saw decades ago, we're also going to allow viewers to have a perspective, to understand the root causes of the human rights crisis that we're seeing unfold in the country right now. Given the fact that the security is so tight for many people who remain in the country, including filmmakers and journalists, we had to exercise great caution to ensure that nobody was going to be put at risk. That sadly led to some films that we absolutely loved and that the filmmakers wanted to be included, Burmese filmmakers, but they had to pull the film because the security situation didn't allow for them to become public at this moment. But we were very determined to ensure that we had a platform that was explicitly films made in Burma by Burmese directors. And as you mentioned, there has been such an incredible flourishing of film, particularly since the democratic transition began. And I myself have participated in several different editions of the Human Rights, Human Dignity International Film Festival, which was, of course, a landmark festival curated by the wonderful filmmaker Mintin Kokoji and also Momo Myat. So I had a deep connection to them. I'm also quite close with the founders of the Wathan Film Festival. So I reached out to them to ask them if they had some titles that they wanted to share. And we began with those connections that we had, as well as to filmmakers who we knew. And that's how we started putting them together. And some of the other films made by the foreign directors outside of Myanmar, among them were people that we knew as colleagues. And then there were others that we found, and we said, how about this? This is quite interesting. And slowly but surely, it started to piece itself together in what is now, I think, a really outstanding collection that people can enjoy for 10 days at their convenience. So once you've registered for the film festival, it just requires an email. It's quite simple, and a password. Once you've registered, you can enter the film festival website and watch any film at any time at your own discretion during the next, what is now 8 days left, I guess, of the festival. We're going through June 13th.
And as mentioned, you are a filmmaker yourself, and you directed, I think, at least one of the films in this festival. So could you please tell us about your contribution to the festival in this way?
Yes, I'm very fortunate to have an incredible team of people with whom I work. And I've been working in Burma for many years, for many decades. I work with Burmese colleagues inside the country. So every film we produce from our small team, which is the Kirana Productions that you mentioned at the introduction, we are a nonprofit entity, and we produce human rights documentaries that are used for advocacy. And they're also used, as a film in of itself, as a tool for a catalyst for change. And our film team, some of them remain inside the country. And then myself and my colleague, Greg Butensky, who's the co-founder and is also part of this festival team, put these films together. So we actually are fortunate to have 3 different titles in the festival. One of them is our last release called Ame Thami Ama, which is mother, daughter, sister. That was filmed both in the Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh, as well as in the IDP area in northern Kachin state. And that film explores the issue of sexual violence in conflict and the impunity of Myanmar's military in carrying out rape as a weapon of war against ethnic women across the range of decades since the conflict has begun. And we also have a title called Dilo Achepmyo, which is This Kind of Love. And I would point people to that one because that is a profile, a very beautiful poetic portrait of a remarkable activist named Aung Myo Min, who has recently been appointed to be the new Minister of Human Rights. And in fact, he is one of our two NUG, National Unity Government, special guests that will close out the festival next Saturday night. So if you want to know anything about him and how he ended up becoming the Minister of Human Rights, you could watch that film. And we have another film that we produced that was released just at the beginning of Myanmar's transition called Into the Current. The Burmese name is Ye Zan La, Into the Current, Burma's Political Prisoners, that explores the incredible work done by the Assistance Association of Political Prisoners, led by Kobo G, and his longtime childhood friend, Min Ko Naing, who's, of course, an icon in the nonviolent movement in Myanmar.
Wow, fantastic. Those three sound definitely worth watching. And like you've mentioned, it's so easy to do so. You just click and then go full screen. Now, you've mentioned a little bit about your cinematic career. Many people, when they go to the movies, they just want to watch buildings explode. So how can making and showing films actually affect political change? Do you have anything to say about that?
I have been honored to witness the power of storytelling. And the power of storytelling is something that is a very interesting symbiotic process whereby the filmmaker is the repository of the story, but the person who's sharing the story are themselves empowered through that process of giving their history, of exposing their heart, of allowing us to see their vulnerability, allowing us to see their pain, but most importantly, allowing us to see how they can inspire others by transcending all these incredible challenges. And that's what I think films can do. They can transport people inside of somebody's environment, inside of their life in a really intimate way that gives you that kind of experiential, immersion in understanding, when you then zoom back out to the political picture, why these things are happening in Myanmar and what has happened before that has led to what is happening now. So I think storytelling is just an incredible instrument for sparking discussion, for bringing people closer, and for opening people's hearts into understanding and having more compassion.
I concur wholeheartedly on the power of film. And now I get to ask the two of you, Kenneth and then Jeannie, which are your favourite films showing at this film festival?
I have my personal favorites, of course, because I'm interested in poetry, particularly poetry translation. I'm interested. I love the movie Burma Storybook. Burma Storybook features a lot of Burmese poets and former political prisoners, many of whom are actually interested in poetry and poets themselves. And the cinematography is just wonderful. So there is this, this is a movie where the way the sunset colors reflected in the Irrawaddy River, for example, complements the beauty of the poem that is happening in the foreground. So that's one of my favorite, one of the favorite films. Another one is pretty clearly the Burma Spring 21, a short film that sums up and captures the energy of what happened immediately after the military coup. There is this very poignant moment when the protesters walked up to the line of security personnel in riot gears and put roses into the shields and their helmets. And I was watching this moment in that film and I'm thinking, those were the moments that were possible at the time when both sides of the divide still treated each other as human beings, recognizes the humanity of the other side, even though they may be on the opposite end of the political divide. But eventually, of course, as we all know, the soldiers and the army started shooting at the protesters. And when that happened, these kind of moments of coming together with a sense of peace is no longer possible.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Kenneth. Recommendation there for Burma Spring 21 and Burmese Storybook. And how about you, Jeannie? Over to you.
Gosh, it's so difficult to answer that, but I'm very partial to, bringing light to our Burmese colleagues' productions that are in there. And there's one remarkable film that I actually was there in Yangon when it showed at the Human Rights, Human Dignity Festival called Vein. It's really something because the filmmakers had incredible access to Pakan, which is the world's largest jade mine in Kachin State. And it tracks that whole exodus of refugees, in a sense, like economic refugees, and the mass migration that happens across Myanmar from impoverished communities in finding any kind of work in places like Pakan. And the images are kind of apocalyptic when you see the working conditions that these people are, it's beyond description. But something quite incredible happens in the film. I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but it's really worth watching to understand, again, the issues that drive poverty and why does somebody from Rakhine State trek all the way up to Kachin State to do a dangerous job. It's a beautiful film. We also have some films that are really just little insights into the everyday bucolic life of traditional Myanmar. And one lovely one that I really like is called Buffalo Boat. It's a short, and it's about a family of buffalo herders. It's quite beautiful. We have another short film, which is a feature called The Goods, also by a Myanmar director. And we have only one animation, but I encourage everyone to watch it. It's incredible. It's called My Life I Don't Want. If people are interested in understanding a little bit more, for viewers who are not so familiar with Daw San Suu Kyi, and it's somewhat dated, but it's worth watching. It's called Lady of No Fear. And that's definitely a primer film, I would say, for people who have heard her name but don't know a whole lot about her. Gosh, I could go on for quite a while, but those are some of the really nice ones.
Thank you, Jeannie. They all sound awesome. And just going back to what Kenneth, you were saying there about how the soldiers started shooting, there really was quite an incredible amount of audiovisual material coming out of Myanmar in the early days of the peaceful protests. And subsequently, it is a bit like that old metaphor of Burma, going dark.
Yeah, in the last 10 years, let's be honest about it, right? The last 10 years meaning the country was under one form of authoritarian rule or another between 1962 to 2011. And between 2011 to 2021 was really a period of gradual transformation. And then you have this imperfect kind of democracy where some freedom of expressions were permitted, some sort of censorship was still around, and the political process was somewhat clunky. But you could sort of see that the something that resembles democracy was struggling to be born in that 10 years. And I would say that most of the films that we are watching now in this film festival, the documentaries in particular, were made possible because of this environment, that environment of partial openness. I can't really imagine if the military rule were to continue with the same level of oppression that we are seeing now. I can't really imagine somebody making a movie like The Vote that records the energy around one particular Democratic candidates campaign to garner votes from the people, and the energy and the people's vested interest in seeing their candidate win. I can't really imagine somebody making a movie about the LGBTQ community and the struggle in this conservative Buddhist society. I can't really imagine people making movies about persecuted minority like the Rohingyas, and having on record people who have enough courage to stand up for this minority group, even though in doing so they draw the fire of many of the people around them. I can't imagine people making these kind of documentaries in the current environment. So I think we may, unfortunately, if the way things are going continues, we may actually look at that 10-year period as probably the golden age of Burmese documentary filmmaking.
Now we've brought that up, yeah. Not just documentaries, also feature films as well. The last 10 years saw a little bit of turbulence whereby there was a lot of inertia in the film industry inside Myanmar. Very set patterns and forms of films have been made since the early 90s, and suddenly there were different forms of expression and different kinds of films struggling to be made and garnering huge popularity, like Christina Key and Zen Key's films. And those filmmakers, those two in particular and others, subsequently joined the protests and then were faced with arrest. So it's clear that Myanmar's film industry is also, in a way, under threat, or the way that it was opening up for more diverse voices is under threat.
It's true. You have famous actors like Minlu, for example, known for starring in action films and in romantic comedies, who has been arrested and who's presumably in insane jail. And you have famous comedian like Zagana, who had previously been arrested for participating in political activism, now once again arrested and in detention. And famous actress like Paing Pyo-thu, who actually appeared in many of the films that are directed by Christina Key that you talked about, where in one film, I remember in particular, she portrayed this femme fatale called Me, based on a famous Burmese novel by G.A. by the same name called Me. She, on the other hand, is in hiding. We don't know where she is, but she is safe as far as I know. The sad thing about this is many of these talented people who have contributed films to our festival cannot actually publicly say, look at these films. These are our works. What you're watching is our live product. They cannot say that, because if they come out and say this publicly, they expose themselves to greater danger. And many of them are in the wanted list, charged under Section 505 and in hiding.
Yeah, it is tremendously sad. Look, before we wrap up, I just wanted to quickly ask about the roundtables. Now, there are panel discussions as part of this festival, as we've mentioned. Are there any particular panel discussions or roundtables that you'd like to highlight here before we wrap up?
The one roundtable that I'm really looking forward to is the chat with the union ministers from the National Unity Government, particularly the Human Rights Minister, U Aung Myo Min. U Aung Myo Min appeared as a character in one of the documentaries that I was involved in making called This Kind of Love. So people could actually watch that film to get a sense of U Aung Myo Min before he became a minister, and listen to the live roundtable with the ministers, so that you can get a sense of the kind of greater responsibility he has taken on. A more personal reason I'm looking forward to it is because U Aung Myo Min and I were both English major students in our Rangoon University school days. He was 1 year senior to me, so I'm so proud to be speaking to him as a minister. There's a heavy burden on his shoulder to shepherd the country into a new chapter.
And if any listeners are interested in that particular roundtable, If you're in Southeast Asia like I am, it falls on June the 12th. And I would like to once again implore our listeners to go to the Burma Spring Film Festival website by searching for its name online. As soon as this podcast finishes, jump on and watch some movies. Thank you so much, Kenneth. Thank you so much, Jeannie.
Really appreciate your time, Luke, and we hope to welcome many of your listeners to take advantage of this. It's quite an offering. Both the speakers forum, the live discussions, which are recorded every day. So if you miss it, it's up on the website, and then these incredible films. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks for featuring me in the program, Luke. Looking forward to having more conversations later down the line.